The borders of space and time have opened once again, and transmitting from the mountains of West Virginia, it's time once again for Let's Find Out with Diego. The universe is waiting for you.
All systems go.
On this episode of Let's Find Out, our guest is a MUFON Field Investigator and at the forefront of the UFO phenomenon, actively involved with some of the most prominent UFO disclosure leaders of our time. His work is centered on a truly groundbreaking development, the meticulous research and investigation involved in vetting the world's first disclosure of a Soviet scientist's UFO reverse engineering log. This is a story that could change everything we think and know. All this plus more. Please welcome a new friend to our show and MUFON, Massachusetts Chapter Field Investigator, Jim Awrach. Jim, my friend, welcome to Let's Find Out.
Can't thank you enough, Diego. I was totally psyched when I got the invite, and here we are. And at the risk of sounding like I'm doing a promo for you, I think your thumbnails and promotional posters or pictures, whatever you want to call them, are really unique and very cool. They look almost like a comic book type of atmosphere. And when I saw the one that you did for our interview, I thought it was totally cool. So hats off.
I appreciate it. It's a lot of inspiration because of what the information you sent me by email. And I know we've been contacting back and forth for the last couple of months. Actually, we've been on Instagram. I don't even know how we started having a conversation.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. I don't know where the genesis of it began, but I do know that I did ask you to come on the show, and I was not expecting you to say yes. And you said, yeah, man, when do you want me to come on? I said, how about sometime in August? You're like, deal.
Yeah.
And,
it's awesome. Yeah.
And then here we are. So as with anything, before we go into the MUFON Field Investigator work that you do, so how did your journey with the interest of investigating UFOs begin? Now, did you see something? Did you have any experiences back in your younger days, or did something develop more as you're towards adulthood?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, I was always into science fiction. I'm an engineer by by job trade, so I was always into inventions and gadgets, and kids would come over after elementary school. And I hate when they call me James. It's like nowadays, like people don't call me Jim or Jimmy; they call me James. I feel like I'm back in grade school. But they kind of James, and they pass by my house. What's your invention you got this week? And so these kids, even some kids that like the tough bully kids, they'd pass by my house and they want to come in and see my inventions and all that stuff. So kind of like a technical. And I was into robots and all that. And there were these very old shows about space travel, like Lost in Space, but nothing really piqued my interest into UFOs or UAPs until a later point in life. I mean, I did have some supernatural experiences outside of that, although there is a relation between some new supernatural experiences and UFOs, which we could get into at some point if you want. And I understand what the relationship is now. UFOs proper, the only experience I had was growing up in Malden, Mass. My brother was always into astronomy. So he found something in the sky that we didn't know what it was. I was probably like about 8 and he was 11, something like that. And I was around 7 or 8 in Malden, Mass. And it was weird. So it was extremely bright, but it would change shapes, it would change colors. And back then you would just assume it's a star, or maybe we didn't really know growing up as kids what a nebula is, or you would think it's something like that. And he was convinced it was something more. But he was able to locate it several times in the same spot. And you could relate that to nowadays between those drone incursions and other weird things that we've seen in the sky, different shapes and colors. So to be honest, who really knows? And nowadays that I'm in MUFON, I had encouraged my brother countless times to file a report, and he's like, "But Jimmy, what good is that?" I'm like, "Well, I can beg and plead with the state director to assign it to me, and I can investigate your case. I go, I can't file it because you're not allowed to investigate your own case. I'm like, do you want to file? Because then I could spend a little bit of time and resources, and there's plenty of records and things, and see if I could at least recreate the sky conditions or see if there were any reports and stuff. So for whatever reason, he doesn't want to file a report. Some people feel like that, But anyway, that was the only UFO thing. And other than that, we had this Ripley's Believe It or Not book that kids would like, and then there was this section towards the end showing all these different shapes of UFOs that nowadays they're all common shapes, and I've seen just about all of them that are in that old book, and that's about it growing up. So there was nothing during my childhood that inspired me and pointed me towards ufology.
And you were talking about the book, talking about the different types of extraterrestrials they had pictured on there. I think more of the common ones back then was the grays, and whether tall or they're short. Yeah. But now it's expanded a whole lot more, where I don't know the number. So if I say the number, people are like, no, Diego, you're wrong. And I probably am wrong. But now these races have expanded because you have the Nordics, you have the insects, you have, of course, a reptilian. Yeah. Then you have the grays, and then you have, I believe, there's also the
there's everything. There's plasmoids of all sorts. I mean, really, the list goes on. It's to be honest, I don't know what to make out of it. But there's no end to the amount of reports of either abductions or recollections that they were abducted at some point in their life, or that someone or something is in communication with people. Very, very common, and so common that that there's something to it. Diego, and so that's my whole point, because I, being an engineer and working with a lot of other engineers, it's funny because half of them agree that either aliens or unidentified anomalous phenomena or unidentified flying objects, half of them agree there's something to it. We just don't know what it is all the time. And the other half laugh because they think it's still part of this. Well, it's still stigmatized, and they just think it's like silliness. And for me, I think it's interesting, and I approach it from the science and technology aspect, because that's what I enjoy doing. Can these things be explained by science and technology? Some of these things, are they related to energy levels or energy shells of beings? And those type of things are proven fact that we have energy levels about us. You might have heard of like the chakras, different energy levels in a person, and so it's a huge field, and it's not easy to even keep track of how many different beings there are, or that people say there are. And I, quite honestly, I couldn't even tell you.
It would be hard to pinpoint, being that the galaxy, the universe in itself, there's many solar systems that can probably have the proper environment to produce extraterrestrials, or at least have them come from a certain part, but they're so far away, which is, I think, what people have a hard time is, how can they create a ship, engineer some sort of technology that would make them travel they're from light years away. Yeah. Some say interdimensional, some say they use wormhole technology, or they're actually moving space around them. They're not really being propelled by any type of energy. Being an engineer, as you are, if, let's say, there's a bona fide craft of some sort, what would it take for intelligent life to create something that would be able to travel through space like that?
Yeah, and that isn't that a good one? I'll skip out the second half of the word, and I'll just abbreviate. So that's a cluster F of a question.
Of course.
and the reason is, there are so many different damn types of craft and conceptual craft. Um, and so I think your question was, what would it take for an entity to travel to Earth? I think that's what your question was.
Sure, if they're using, let's say, if they're not using some sort of Stargate or a wormhole
Oh,
or
sure.
jumping
Yeah.
through dimensions,
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember a number. There's a really smart physicist. His name is Dr. Kevin Newth. I don't know if you're familiar, but he's out of U of Albany in New York, and he's part of the Soul Foundation, SOL. They're so they're a disclosure movement. And it was interesting. I was watching a recording of one of his lectures, and I believe he said that coming from him, I might misquote him, but I believe he said it was something like within the realm of possibility, but something like 50 million with an M light years would be the closest feasible, call it star system or planetary and solar system where they could come from. So he said it's possible, but then he put it in terms of a percentage, and he said, however, the probability of it, and then it was like it wasn't even 1%, it was 0 point, then there were a bunch of zeros, and then a 1%. So it was like he was like, in other words, remotely possible. And then there's a reason why I'm using his answer, but his answer, Dr. Kevin Newth, was therefore his feeling was if there is any type of craft that's being examined or type of craft that's present here, that for us to have come across it at some point, it would have already have been here, a million or millions of years prior. And so that was his point. So the chance of us seeing one, say, simultaneously with this same point in time is pretty slim, but the chance of one coming in the future, that there's one that was around here, that's more probable. So that's one aspect. My aspect, I would say, from a technology standpoint, I honestly think it's possible, although I have no idea. But I do. I'm like about my personal opinion. I'm about 90% confident, but that's just an opinion, that we do have advanced craft on the planet that we as human beings don't understand how they operate. Although we're getting there, and that's both from a government standpoint, this disclosure movement. And I'm not alluding to any conspiracy theories. I just, I have a certain belief. And then the other half of it is there are some world respected scientists / engineers that have been studying plasmoids that are, they believe them in some cases to be beings. In other cases, they believe them to be some sort of nanotechnology craft, not of human origin. And their belief, though, I think their belief, I'm referring to the Tedesco brothers. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but they're known researchers, and I believe they think that they've been here all along, and they've been studying those things in different light spectrum. Like they seem to find them a lot in the infrared. So from that standpoint, they're highly credible researchers that in some cases they have fragments, and based on their inspection of these fragments, and I was speaking to one of them. He has something known as, I'm not sure if you saw an article called Arts Parts, but it's related to something that was a fragment of a UFO that one way or another made its way, I think, from the Roswell incident or near Roswell. And from the other perspective, these scientists that are actually seeing entire crafts, and they have colleagues that are seeing them, and based on the light spectrum that they're studying these things in and measuring them in, they've seen, I think they were calling them polyhedrons. In other words, not necessarily a spherical, three-dimensional circle, which is a sphere, but something more like, I don't know, maybe a three-dimensional octagon or something like that. So they call it a polyhedron. Really weird stuff that they suspect is not of human origin. But whether or not they originate from this planet and how long they've been here, that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, and I've also heard of the similar theory where I know we're looking into outer space, but they actually possibly just come from Earth a long time ago, and they've never left. And some say they might have gone underground, or sometimes they come from the ocean.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. That's huge. You're totally right. There's, Richard Dolan is a big researcher with that unidentified submersible objects. Luis Elizondo had spoken about that. A lot of people had observed, seen that. The Tedesco brothers also are researching that, and another one, very very world respected astronomer and basically astrophysicist, Avi Loeb. He's he often does ocean expeditions looking for pieces of craft underwater. So I totally agree with you, Diego, and the reason is, and actually not everybody, a lot of people in the disclosure movement on Capitol Hill are pointing towards the ocean because all of them, and the author I mentioned too, are saying that approximately 80% of the ocean on this planet has not even been explored or mapped or anything.
I agree. Yeah.
So if you think, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry, because we might be I think we're on the same train tracks here, because when you're looking at a map, or let's just say the standard globe, and all the land masses are there, but these are things that other people have created that not all of us get to see in our lifetime. In my opinion, there's a possibility, I believe strong, that there are other land masses on this planet that either A, we've never discovered, or B, purposely not being divulged.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know if that's where you're going, but that's where my mind is right now.
It's funny. I was going to something similar, which is you might be thinking of this whole fabled Atlantis is one thing, and there's been different theories about where is Atlantis or where was Atlantis and all that. And I often wonder, not necessarily Atlantis, but if there was some sort of call it a breakaway civilization, not purposely broken away, but so human evolution, right? Well, I mean, who really knows? They're all theories or whatever, but it seems logical that the classical theory is ocean life, and then there was something crawling on the sand, etc. Then birds, monkeys, apes, whatever, and then whatever, cavemen, people. That's like the classical, and that probably changed a little because it's been a long time since I graduated high school. But I often wonder, was there a separate evolution path? And and other ufologists have theorized that there may have been, where instead of evolving into people, or maybe perhaps evolving beyond people, for example, these plasmoids that are often seen for whatever reason near water, so I think between the evolution path and then also perhaps there was a certain species of, well, like you'd mentioned the Nordics or whatever. Well, I wonder, just another type of, say, more advanced human being that evolved faster and technologically far, far, far ahead of us. And maybe some of these craft that are unidentified and that defy logic and reason, maybe that's just somehow our, for lack of a better word, cousins or whatever, that, they got there faster than us. We're still crawling on all fours, and, they're just doing their thing.
I can completely see that. And if you go back to something about Atlantis, because my understanding is that there might have been some that did escape that catastrophic event and might have started other civilizations or nations somewhere else.
Yeah.
So maybe these things are descendants of people from Atlantis, because at that point in time, if we subscribe to that story, that theory, that they were more advanced than most of any humans on the planet at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are other evolution theories out there. I forget the name of of the catastrophic event, but there was some event on this planet, not as bad as like the comet. I don't know if it's a comet theory or fact, that when the comet smashed into the planet, or a meteor or whatever it was, that's how the moon formed. That's what put the Earth on its axis. That's what killed the dinosaurs, and then reset the whole thing. And then eventually humans came about. But that's the theory, the part of the evolution theory.
Was that called panspermia? Was that what it was called? I'm sorry.
It may be.
Yeah.
It may be. I get. I'm at a loss for that, if that's what it is. But it's really weird though, because when they come across these fossils, sometimes once in a blue moon they'll also have some piece of technology that's totally out of place, and it's kind of weird. So, and there's all sorts of theories, of course. I'm sure you've seen it, Diego, and different documentations, like about different theories about the pyramids, and if you've got a larger mass, or if you've got a very powerful gravitational pull force field, then time is going to stretch out and move slower compared to around it. And there are theories that's what the pyramid was related to. And then there's other theories. I don't know if it's been proven for fact, but there are theories and there are papers about the pyramids were actually advanced power plants of sorts. So I don't know. I think there's a good chance that those things we're seeing have always been here. But some people feel it's more of a chance of that than there is some non-human intelligence coming from far out and selecting Earth. But I mean, you never know. It's that is kind of the cool thing. It's creative. That's why I like it.
Yes, but then you have the folks that actually have seen something, and of course they report it to MUFON. And so it's your job to go out there and interview the people and gather the facts and try to come up with some sort of conclusion as to what do you think they saw. Or so let's move into that, because the work you do is very important. Because other than back, I think in the 50s, I'm not going to talk about Project Blue Book. That's been talked to about death, but there hasn't been anything on the street level that takes these accounts, in essence, and not as serious as it was back then. Yeah. Now, as a MUFON Field Investigator, how does that work? And when I'm asking that question is when you're assigned to a case. Now, does MUFON give you a call, email you, and say, here's a report we have, or are they calling you directly?
It's kind of interesting, but so somebody submits a case to MUFON. There's I believe it's toll free, but anyways, there's a main number. So I mean, there's you could submit by phone, right? There's an email, or you can go online and they have a submission form. And the cool thing I like about it is tell them as much or as little as you like, and it'll be investigated. People feel more comfortable leaving their name out, and contact information and they're anonymous, it still gets investigated. People want to give their contact information because they're curious or they need closure or something. They give it and we contact them when it gets assigned, but their name and contact info is kept private unless they specifically ask, or if we ask that it's released or used as a reference or whatever. No is no, yes is yes, but it's always treated as private and confidential unless the witness or experiencer says otherwise. So all that's cool, gets reported, goes into the main case management system, it's called for MUFON, and then it gets vetted through MUFON at the headquarters, and sometimes they look at it. Okay, well, is this a legitimate report or is someone screwing around? And okay, well, it's a legit report. It gets to that point, and then it depends where it was cited or whatnot, and it gets assigned to the state director. And then the state director does an initial vetting, and based on experience of field investigators or based on location of field investigators or availability, you might have a field investigator that's backed up with like 10 cases for whatever reason. They have different decisions or criteria that the state director assigns the case to a certain field investigator. And sometimes the state director will take it upon themselves to investigate something if it's a complex case. Abduction cases, the field investigator usually does what we can, but then we refer it back to there is a experienced resource team within MUFON corporate, but also a lot of times it gets they reassign it to the state director for like abduction cases or let's say some sort of personal attack or bodily harm or something like that, because it's a very emotional personal experience regardless of what it is. Even if something you see something you don't understand, it's like, holy crap, I'm report it. A lot of people who report it, they're either curious or they're like, I think I found something, this is cool because I want disclosure, or they need some sort of personal closure because it just freaked them out. They've never seen or heard anything like it. So the various reasons. There seems to be a handful of core reasons why people submit. So then what happens is usually you get a phone call from the state director. You always get an email from them with the case being assigned, but usually you'll also get a phone call at the beginning if you're newer, in the middle of the process, and then you'll have a follow-up call with the state director at the end as you're either continuing the case or closing the case. And what I like about closing the case is it doesn't mean, okay, we're done forever. All it means is, sooner or later when you close a case, it means, okay, we've investigated it as far as we can go at this point, and it's closed for now. But if the experiencer requests to be opened back up because they have new information, or if the field investigator just realizes something or anybody realizes something, the case can be opened up 2 years later or 2 seconds later. And that's what I like about it. So it's not like something's in the system and it gets forgotten about.
And that's good because once this information gets ingested in the system, well, let me go back a little bit because diving a little more about how these cases are investigated. In my mind, well, how many of these cases do you actually go to a location to interview somebody physically?
It varies. Some field investigators like to do it by audio, by phone, and email. I've been on location a couple times, and then other times, and and I won't obviously anybody listening out there, I'm not giving out names or geographical locations, so you folks don't have to worry. Living up to my promise. I have spoken to some witnesses or experiencers by Zoom video, private, and which works out terrific, because if you can't get there for some reason, like if it's all the way across the end of the state, say for example, border of New York or something like that, but you have a Zoom call in private, they can actually walk you through where they were, what they saw, what happened next. And, so I strongly suggest that. It doesn't have to be done. There's all sorts of different tools. I've been on site a couple times. Some witnesses do an outstanding job with videos and maps of where it happened, and different things that occurred that night, what it could be, what it couldn't be, because they want to know. They're really truly interested. Some people are anonymous. Most people will leave their private contact information for the field investigator because they would like a call back or an email or something, because they're interested in helping to solve a case, or you come to the conclusion, that insufficient data to know what the heck it is, or hell yeah, that's an anomaly. We just don't know what kind. There've been, I've had a good variety of cases now. I'm relatively new to MUFON, although I've studied cases themselves for like about, I'd say, almost 8 years, and then I joined MUFON about half a year ago. But I've had a good number of cases now that I've had a nice variety, and some interesting things, some stuff that either can't be explained or would fall into a certain category. Like these, a lot of people see orbs or plasmoids. Those are very common. And then other categories, like people think that they see plasma that's intelligently moving through the sky. So I won't mention who or where, but that one turned out to be spotlights. It was pretty well. I'm always very open-minded. I'm not opinionated. I mean, I could tell right away it was spotlights, but I asked them and they were convinced it wasn't. So I my state director even told me, he was like, all right, Jim, you've spent enough time on this. You convinced me it's spotlights. I'm like, well, I just got to spend a little more time because there's always a chance. So that is my one weakness. I do, when I delve into cases, sometimes it does really consume me.
Well, and then with these cases now, if you were to go to a location and they're going to walk you through either a field or somewhere outdoors, paranormal investigators, when they go out and investigate some cases, do their research. Some goes a team, some goes solo, but a lot of them take equipment with them, whether it's phone apps, whether it's REM pods or dowsing, all these dowsing rods, whatever, all these things, right? As a going on the UFO path. Do you take anything with you? So, and excuse me, because I'm not really experienced in these type of things, but do you go in there if there's a team or just you? Do you take some sort of device where it measures maybe radiation? Are we looking at something like that, or are we just strictly having an interview with the person?
So it's always at least an interview, but you wouldn't believe it, and I'm not even embarrassed to do this. Depending on the type of case, and depending on how well equipped you are. Check this out, right? This is you could see it. This is the MUFON Field Investigator's Handbook, right? And a lot of people laugh because it's an open book test, that you take online. You really can't cheat on it, although they allow you as much time as you want. But if you could just imagine, there's a lot in there, but one of the sections in it tells you about different. Well, I guess I'll put that aside now. I won't go off on too much of a tangent, but it tells you on different types of cases what you need to bring. So, for example, if there's a suspected craft or piece of a craft, there's a guide on how to conduct a low level radiation survey. And or if there's something like some biological sample or something, everything from how to use powder-free nitrile gloves all the way to how to properly preserve the sample, and so it's really crazy. So depending on the type of case you have, if you really want to do a good job, there's just a lot of stuff. So what I always have, because it's really easy, and it's really really cool. There's I suppose you could call it an EMF, but really it's a Gauss meter app that you can get for free for your Android or iPhone. So it measures magnetic field strength. So I was looking at a case in the northern area, and I was actually using it because there were reports that objects were seen near the water. So I was actually I got a very crude, rudimentary, very rough kind of magnetic field profile, because these things are said to kind of sort of navigate with magnetic fields. And it was kind of interesting because it proved my assumptions to be totally opposite of what I thought. So from that sense it worked out, although the magnetic fields went from present to the closer I got to the water to like zip, which from an electrical engineering standpoint, I understand why that happened. And that brings up more questions like, okay, well then how the hell do these things work? So there's that. There's a really cool trick I learned from the Tedesco brothers. Let's say you see one of these craft, and obviously you don't want to violate federal law, and you don't want to point a damn laser at a cockpit because you're going to blind somebody and God forbid cause a crash or whatever. But what the Tedesco brothers were showing is if you suspect it's one of these foreign adversaries that were during the drone incursions, or if you think it's some sort of plasmoid or whatever, you could tell whether or not there's this what's known as a gravitational lens that actually bends light, similar to the way objects in space bend it. So if you were to actually point it near the object in the general direction, not at it, not on it, but in the general direction, and you saw that the beam kind of curved a little, that's telling you that you're dealing with something out of the normal. I'll call it paranormal, because that's a gravitational lens. So it's bending a light ray, as opposed to like if you've got an optical lens and you play those lens tricks and it bends light that way. So gravity, depending on what it is, like certainly space objects, is so powerful that it bends light. That's how we see the stars in outer space and things like that. They're so far away, but you've got other objects in space that are bending the light rays, and we could see things. So there's that. I just learned that trick from the Tedescos. They were showing it. So I've got that. Call it the Gauss meter for magnetics. Basic stuff. Tricks like basic angle measurements, like trigonometry. So you can judge from a certain distance. If you know the distance to one thing, and the witness tells you how high they saw it in the sky, and you hold out your thumb at arm's length, and you line up with the angle and so forth, you can get an approximation of the size of the object. So that that's a rule of thumb. The list actually is endless. I mean, if it all depends on the field investigator. And there are a lot of other tools too. You can actually perform a lot of research either before or after going to the site. So for example, Diego, there's a few different flight radar websites. So if you're investigating, somebody saw something in the sky, and they can give you the approximate date and time right away you can look up and say, okay, was it a possibility of a flight? And if there's no record, okay, well, was there any airport close by, even a small one? And there's even this website called Stellarium. I'm not sure if you heard of it, but it's like spelled like stellar, but it's Stellarium. And you put in the exact date and time and geographical location, and it gives you, it's an online app, plus you get something installed locally. It gives you the exact astronomical sky for that time of day or night. And so, and if someone tells you, so I've used it on a few cases, and someone said they saw something at a certain point in their backyard. So what I'll do is I use Google Maps, from their address. Obviously I keep their, that information confidential within, MUFON's case system, but I'll see, okay, where were they located on their property? And, you can see Google Maps with the satellite overview and stuff like that. Okay, they were located at that location, for example, in their backyard. And they said it was at a certain height. And then, with this Stellarium online app, you recreate the sky at that time of day or night. And you could see if there was any type of star or nebula or whatever, comet or something, that they may have possibly, confused it to be something else. So, lots of, and I know I'm forgetting a lot of other apps, different online weather history apps, everything from the, forecasts all the way to the present, and then accurate previous weather records, because there are weather anomalies that look like craft.
And well, let's talk about that. What kind of weather anomaly could somebody mistakenly think is a craft?
Oh my God.
What's going on?
Well, there's all sorts of things like, let's just call them, for lack of a better term, let's call them let's call them ice storms, or just, let's say, let's call them icy clouds with the sun reflecting off, or even the moon reflecting off. So you get a prism effect. During broad daylight, you could have weird formations of clouds themselves, or you can have a gap in the cloud. Other things, let's see, weather. There's different. I'm not too much of a weatherman, but there's different type of let's call them storm, let's say depressions. So pressure areas where it looks like a freaking black spot in the middle of the sky, and you're like, what the heck is that object? It is an object, but the object is actually, let's call it pockets of air or storms or whatnot. There's, I mean, the list goes on. Another thing, right? Very common. Well, I should say very common, but common enough. I'm not sure if you've heard of ball lightning. So it's,
I have.
yeah. So actually it is plasma. It's interesting how it forms, but so that's a type of a plasmoid. Not very comfortable if you get hit by ball lightning. I know historically people studying it and actually creating in the lab. One, forget his name. I think I want to say it was like in the 1700s. He was able to recreate ball lightning, and he wound up killing himself. I forget the name of that guy.
You only do it once.
Yeah, you can only do it once. That's for whatever reason. I'm very fascinated with plasmoids, and ball lightning seems to come up a lot. But that's kind of a weird one, because I'd mentioned a couple of interviews ago, one of your guests into paranormal entities, I had actually asked him, in ufology, you see, well, we often come across reports of orbs of different colors, orange, yellow, whatever, red, white, referred to as plasmoids. And you'll notice that in haunted house episodes, like Ghost Hunters or whatever, or even if you go into the Salem, Massachusetts witch tours, they'll show you pictures of these plasma orbs or just white orbs that have been caught floating around or kind of drifting in areas reported to be haunted. So I asked this gentleman, I think he said his name was Jay Hill. I can't remember.
Yeah, I had him a little while ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I asked him, I said, is it possible that these paranormal, which means, out of the normal, white orbs most of the time, sighted in reportedly haunted areas, are one and the same as these plasmoids that we're seeing that are either craft or entities? And he gave me a very interesting but honest answer, and which was he never thought about it. It's a good question, and he doesn't know either. And I've asked many people, and they don't know. Haven't met anybody yet that knows for sure. I think there's a connection in some case, although that's just shot in the dark. People that have experiences with plasmoids that are thought to be entities. I've had a discussion with a few of them. One was an experiencer, and the other, they were researchers. In both cases, it seems that these plasmoids, or let's just say spherical, glowing or sort of sparkling orb-like objects, have interacted in one way or another, either almost, according to the witnesses, or people studying these from a scientific standpoint, either from indirect, sort of like you're getting an idea in your head that an entity is saying something like, "Oh, sorry to bother you," type of thing. Or in other cases, you get these freaking things that are like in infrared. And this is my friends again, the Tedesco brothers. We don't want you to be watching us, and they'll go from infrared to visible, and they'll be very unfriendly. They've said that on many of their interviews. So it's really interesting, and so that thought, it does seem to be that that plasmoids or orbs, whether they're looking for attention or not, seem to have some sort of interaction with people.
That's interesting. So sometimes the crossroads of ufology and paranormal do meet at some sort of a point. And I think sometimes maybe we're all looking for the same things, but we call it something different.
Totally. Which is weird. I mean, at the right time, I could explain to you what my paranormal experience was, or we could say it at the right time, but it does kind of help me understand what the connection is to UAPs or UFOs. And it makes sense why ufologists often talk about ESP, or they talk about energy levels emanating from people, or they talk about remote viewing and things like that.
And before, not anybody in this audience, of course, but outside of our realm, people who may be skeptical and stuff,
Sure.
don't think it's just something that we're all making up, or that we're the only ones talking about it, because not so long ago, this was something that was practiced by different countries and different military installations where this was going on.
Sure.
So it's not something that is just being made up. There's an interest in there, and there's someone out there saying, we believe this is real. Let's test this out. And this went on for many years in different installations, government installations around the world. I don't like naming them.
Yep.
I don't like
You're totally right, though. You're totally right. If someone were to do their research, they would see what you're saying is 100% correct.
And then, which brings me to the case of why we're here, my friend, because not only is these kind of experimentations happening here in the United States and other countries, but we're going to go across the pond now to a time where this country had a different name, Soviet Union.
Mhm.
And I was able to see towards the end of the Cold War what happened and how things changed. But before that, not a very, we didn't know much about them other than what we were told about them. We weren't really told about the type of experiments or exploration they did in space
Mhm.
because we were pretty much getting all the glory for that. But they were pretty advanced, it's my understanding. And they had their own version of an Area 51, their own stories, things that happen on that side of the world. How do we get to the point where the investigation and the research into this Soviet scientist
Mhm.
log?
Yeah.
And first off, if you can share, what is this scientist's name? Is he an unknown?
Yeah, it's really interesting how that whole thing came about. But so the scientist's name is pronounced Valeris Chernohayev, and he was in Latvia both during the Soviet Union and then after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And yeah, really interesting, brilliant guy. And uh, you don't always need to have a PhD to be a scientist. So he was an aeronautical and space engineer by education. Went to I forget the name of the university, but basically the equivalent of what MIT would be over here. And he did not have so he was a degreed engineer, but he did not have a PhD. But someone brilliant like that, that my belief is that would be a formality. And he was really interesting. So I met his son-in-law, and I met this scientist's wife when they contacted MUFON Mass for a press release. So his son-in-law is actually a MUFON Massachusetts chapter research member. And he did a small write-up on this science log that was published in the MUFON April of 2025 journal, discussing some of the operation of what was constantly referred to in this log in Russian as a UFO, repeatedly referring to it as that. It's a really long story, but to cut to the chase, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and there's a whole story. I'm not sure how long you want me to, how much detail you want me to go into, but there's an air of mystery and intrigue over what this guy actually worked on, because he would always say, "Oh, I'm a simple plumber. I'm a humble plumber." Yet the guy would disappear for days or weeks and wouldn't talk about what he did other than, "Oh, yeah, I had a hard plumbing job," or whatever. Yet when he took his daughter, which is she's one of the authors of this book, which they translated his journal from Russian and Cyrillic to English. He used to take his daughter around when she was a child to different fancy parties or gatherings during the days of the Soviet Union with people extremely wealthy and powerful. And so, I don't know, was the guy a plumber and he just had great clientele? Who knows? It could be, but according to her beliefs, she always got the feeling that he was, well respected and well known. They used to get all sorts of fancy gifts and so forth. And I guess the way the story goes, during the time of the Soviet Union and USSR. As you know, Vladimir Putin was in the I believe heading the Russian KGB, or he was very high up in it. And so I guess this scientist Valeris had some friends that were in trouble, and they were busted in prison. So he calls Putin, asks him for a favor, and Putin's like, ha ha ha, but of course, comrade, or whatever, because he knew the guy. And so Putin, calls whatever location these people are being held, and his friends were like out of there in like minutes. So something tells everybody he was more than just a plumber. So that kind of gives you the sort of the aura and the the intrigue and stuff like that. And he was very loyal to the Soviet Union, which I won't criticize him for being loyal to his country, but so here's the irony of it, Diego. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the guy was, and this is according to his son-in-law, Gene, who was the primary author, and his wife, Natalia, who was, Latvian, so spoke Russian, and she translated. Then there's a third author, Mario. So I'd spoke with them at the press. Had the privilege of being with them at the press conference because I was representing Massachusetts MUFON with them. And the guy was so upset at the collapse of his country, and he wanted things to go back the way they were because he enjoyed his work. And I guess he was holding on to his science and engineering notes in hopes that his project would get funded again and he could continue his work. So you could, I could empathize from the standpoint of someone's life is a disaster. It's not going to be the same. So the guy got upset, and apparently he drank himself to death because he damaged his liver to the point that, eventually he died of liver failure. And so I want to say a matter of weeks before he died, he had been speaking with his daughter and son-in-law, and he said, AJ, which was his grandson, so that's the two authors' son, he's interested in aeronautical engineering. And at the time he was, I want to say his grandson was maybe about like 10 years old at the time, more or less, I'm guessing. But he's like, I want to pass this. I have something. I want to send it to him and pass it on because maybe someday he'll be interested. It has to do with aeronautical engineering. So he sends this freaking, stack of files, and the poor guy, so apparently he knew he was on his way out, and apparently, if nothing else, you want to feel like you contributed to the world and so forth. So I could understand what he was thinking in terms of what he had done and the whole controversy of it. And certainly my belief, right? Here's the antithesis, right? Wouldn't it be funny if the adversary spilled the beans? Because during the Cold War, the US, China, and Soviet Union were purportedly, according to many different people, including the disclosure movement that's pushing for disclosure on Capitol Hill as we speak in the year 2025. During the Cold War, there was a race to reverse engineer UFOs that one way or another were recovered. That, at least that's what the story is from folks advocating for disclosure. And during the same time period, there's this science and engineering log, handwritten, in Cyrillic, Russian, during the Cold War era, of this guy doing what looks to me to be either at one extreme theorizing, in theory, here's how a UFO would work, and really deep, heavy physics and engineering. And if it wasn't for the fact that I'm an electrical engineer, I wouldn't know what the heck he was talking about. But the electrical engineering stuff, even the parts that are in Russian, I can make out and vet it and by the way, I've vetted other parts, which we can get to, through other technical people and people that speak Russian, and like things are verbatim. So still vetting it, but I haven't found anybody that said it's a crock of crap. It seems legit. So from one aspect, it was either somebody hypothesizing and theorizing how would such a thing operate based on reports and observation, or from the other aspect, it was someone saying, here's what I've seen, here's what I know about it, and here's how I believe it operates. And the amazing thing about it, Diego, is that there is so much correlation with people like Bob Lazar, Thomas Townsend Brown, and I'm sure some things that Luis Elizondo touched on with gravity bubbles and things like that. All the other major, let's say, contributors to theory of how these craft operate, there is so much in common with it. Yet you know for a fact that this scientist slash engineer in the Soviet Union, he wasn't in communication with these people either because he's on the other side of the world, under the commies. So good luck, dude. If you're gonna talk to anybody in the free world, they'll kill you. And plus, Luis Elizondo coming forward nowadays with what he believes, different time era and different and different location of the planet, and so it's like I've said before, there's no way in God's name it could be a coincidence, and it's just an amazing piece of work, and it's technically heavy, but it also touches on what we were starting to talk about, which is this whole thing about psychology of consciousness, states of consciousness, ESP, a little bit of mind control, out of body experiences, energy emanating from the body, and remote viewing. And so it finally dawned on me, because I'm always like, why are all these, not all, but why are many ufology books putting a section or at least pages about the mind body outer space connection, or people communicating with other beings or whatever, or why do they talk about remote viewing? And according to this journal, with this guy's got equations and dates, and he aligns it with different let's call known theories out there. I don't know if they're fact, but there's known correlations and postulates and things that at different points in time, when the galaxy is rotating, you have repetitive heavenly bodies, astronomical bodies that are aligned in a certain way, and certain events have occurred on the planet Earth, either evolution-wise or politically wise, and repeated cyclical. And this was documented over a matter of like a period of, call it 1,000 years here, hundreds of years there, and what was the general attitude of people or humans at the time or before that, and what was what were people's major movements and political beliefs and all that stuff. So what he does is Valeris hypothesizes that this craft is not only controlled by different, let's say, nuclear power plant. That's a whole nother conversation, and magnetic field manipulation and distortion of, compression of, and movement of gravity fields to distort time-space fabric so that you can move places faster, but also manipulating the materials composing the craft itself, controlled through this entity's mind, not a human being controlling it. But I can't remember if he refers to it as an entity controls it, or he just talks about the influence of the power of mind. So finally, I understand why it is that ufologists are always talking about remote viewing and mind control and things like that, because a lot of people, well, I should say a lot, but there are many ufologists and also let's say, experiencers that they report that they've transcended time, space strictly through a hypnotic state or relaxation or meditation. A good known one who does that. You may have heard of Joe McMonagle. He's one of our more famous remote viewers. Another one was, I think he's an Israeli American, but I forget his last name. But Yuri, they do remote viewing. Yuri was around during Werner von Braun. So the guys up there in age, and scientists would come to him and ask him, different evaluations of things. Is this of human origins and so forth? So there's a major connection between these types of craft or entities and the state of mind.
And no, it's not the first time I've heard this, especially in the UFO circles. That's why I say sometimes what someone considers to be spiritual or paranormal or even in ufology, sometimes these roads do cross each other. But before we go, there's a question that I have though about this journal.
Yeah.
And as you're telling me the story of I'm going to call him the simple plumber.
Yeah. Yeah.
This simple plumber was able to have these documents on hand, of course, that he wrote these things. How was he able to sneak it out of the Soviet Union? Because they didn't play around back then.
Nope.
So I would attribute, because you're talking about that he kind of drank himself to death. Now, and we're talking about he was very sad about the fall of his country.
Yeah.
He wanted his country to go back to be glorious once more. But some of that drinking, perhaps, I'm assuming, and this is my opinion.
Yeah.
Maybe he was a little paranoid of what could happen to him. Was he looking through his window shades? Are they going to come get me? Just because the Soviet Union in itself, by name, was not active, to say. But there's still certain elements of that government that could be operating in the shadows, of course. Was he worried about being found out?
So as far as being found out, there's a lot I could say about that journal, but as far as about being found out, my guess is his intent was hold on to that journal until the research gets funded again. I do know from the two primary authors that, and I don't understand, the plumber connection other than that was a cover story, but the two primary authors whom I know quite well now were saying that he was trying to somehow get private funding in one of the former Russian territories or provinces, and he just, people just weren't interested after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and I believe the intent was hold on to it and keep it safe and so forth, and try to continue the work. As far as paranoia, I don't know about that, but I do know, although this is secondhand information, his girlfriend told the two primary authors that, I know from firsthand information from his daughter, who's one of the primary authors, whenever she visited him, his personality changed because, the poor guy was miserable because of what happened. And also he was a heavy drinker because of what happened, that, he reverted to drinking. So he changed. He was like snappy and, for lack of a better term, I'll just say nasty, not cruel to his daughter, but let's just say nasty. So his personality changed. I'm not sure about paranoid, but he had a very bizarre habit of refusing to wear clothing in good condition, and he only would wear used or old clothing. So the girlfriend, and this is coming secondhand, but it's coming from his son-in-law and daughter, who, those are his kids, right? They basically said, they were speaking with the girlfriend. She's like, the only way I can get this guy to wear, any good clothes that don't have holes or rips is I got to buy new clothes, and then I got to run through the dirt, maybe put a tiny tear somewhere or whatever, and say, here, I found these used clothes. Otherwise, the guy refused to wear them. So obviously something was going on up there in his mind, and whether or not he felt guilty or he just wasn't in the norm, I don't know. And then the last part of so that answers some of the state of mind, although I'm not sure about the paranoia. But the last part of your question, how the heck did he get those files out of the Soviet Union?
Yeah.
The only so I asked Gene Sticko, who's the primary author. That's the scientist's son-in-law. It's basically husband of his daughter, and he doesn't know, because in some cases those journal papers are straight writings in Cyrillic lettering in Russian, where it looks like it's in separate journal paper. In other cases, it looks almost like, and he has the original, which I tried to get a look at, but I respect that he's got it in safekeeping. Basically, it's locked up somewhere for historic reasons, and also I'm convinced it's a monetary value. For the right price and for the right audience, I'm sure he'll give access, whoever that's going to be. And I know him quite well, and I asked before, and he's like, well, the thing is, an attorney's involved, and anytime I look at it, the attorney has to get involved, which costs money. But the short of it is, Diego, other pages of this journal look like they were carbon copies. Do you remember the old paper where you fill out a slip and you pull the white original and you file it somewhere? That's what the ink was. And then the carbon copy is like a yellow slip, and it's got, because of the carbon paper.
I remember back. Yeah. Kind of like the old credit card machines. You used to like put the card. Yeah.
And so some of those papers, I forget what amount, although I got the book right next to me. Some of the papers in the journal look like they're carbon copies. So one way or another, so Gene Sticko and the scientist's daughter, Natalia Chernohayeva, you call it, because his name was Valeris Chernohayev. They're just guessing that a lot of it he did by memory, brain dumps wherever he went to do this engineering, whether it was reverse engineering or let's call it theory, by memory, or while it was fresh in his top of his head, he would just write everything down. Maybe some of it was he was working on it in private at home. And then others, it seems like one way or another, he was able to get copies. Now, whether or not people were aware that there was carbon paper under it, or if there was carbon paper, he snuck it out, I don't know. And I don't think they know either. So that's an excellent question, because now you're alluding to how to know the authenticity. And the only thing I can say about it is from an electrical engineering standpoint, I haven't found anything wrong yet. I showed it to an old professor of mine at UMass at Lowell, and he's an American citizen, formerly from the Ukraine, so he speaks Russian. He's like, all I could tell you, Jim, is that there's nuclear engineering in here, which is beyond my comprehension. And this is an electronics physicist. He's like, I couldn't tell you because I don't know anything about nuclear engineering. Plus, I'm busy with my own research. But it's very interesting. He goes, but the English that I did read, that the scientist's daughter translated, he's like, it's verbatim from the Russian it was written in. And then I showed it to a cousin of mine who's a Russian American. He came from Russia like when he was, like a child. So he's whatever, citizen. I showed him some passages. He's like, Jimmy, the translation's almost verbatim. The Russian's good. And he even, translated some of the scientific paragraphs, although, he disagreed with me about what it meant, but he basically validated that it was legit. So it's definitely legitimate writing in Cyrillic. The engineering so far looks good. I can understand maybe about half of the physics in there. The other half is totally over my head. I'm embarrassed to hell that, so I got a master's in electrical from the Plasma and Pulse Power Lab at Texas Tech University. So that kind of coincides with some of this technology, but I had a minor in solid state physics, which means I had some quantum mechanics education, and I'm embarrassed to death to admit that I can barely follow some of the quantum physics in there. Barely. So, you need, so Gene, the author, and I were talking, you need a team of probably about 10 or 12 engineers and scientists from different disciplines to totally make sense out of it. And I'll tell you, it's quite fascinating. And if you're a history buff, there's a whole damn section in there on history and how it coincides with different star alignment and alignment of things in a galaxy and what it all means, and excuse me, different periods in history. As one person put it, there's something in that scientist journal for everyone. And I think the cool thing is, for the longest time, Gene was just giving the book away in PDF form to anybody interested. And now what he did was, he's like, well, I mean, so he's trying to take it one step further, and he's starting to get attention, but he doesn't care. He posted it on his website. So, I mean, anybody wants, they could actually read the damn book. It's Engineering Infinity Book, .com. I'll double check it really quick. And you can read the whole book online.
I was going to ask you towards the end of the show where the listeners of Let's Find Out, our good friends out there, learn more about the journal. And I think we're just on level 1 of the conversation about this journal. And and if you don't mind, I'd like to bring you back later this year, because I have some questions and I wrote them down, and I think I have a theory as to the simple plumber, what he was up to. My mind's putting me in places where maybe I think that you would have a better answers for. But go ahead with that website one more time.
Sure. As a matter of fact, why don't I pull it up on my phone to make sure? But for folks that would like to stay in touch while I'm looking up that, his links to this and also interviews with the author, those are on Massachusetts MUFON media as well, including, if you go into Instagram, that is MUFON_MA for Massachusetts. Or if you go onto Facebook, just do a search on Facebook for MUFON Massachusetts. Or if you go onto YouTube, all one word, it's called American Road Warrior. And we have links to not only clips of all the videos, but we also have we've got links to Gene Sticko's book and website, and I'm trying to see if I can fill it up now. At one point it was engineeringinfinitybook.com. Just probably take me another. On Instagram, it's Infinity Disclosed, which is their Instagram. Oh yeah, so www, of course, right? Engineeringinfinitybook, all one word, .com.
Perfect. And now we'll put some of those links in the show description when we release the episode. And Jim, I'm serious. I'm going to bring you back later this year. I know you're going to be very busy, but I'm going to give you my theories or my thoughts and opinions of what I think our simple plumber friend was up to and how he got this information. I might be on the right path, but I could be 150% incorrect. Okay. But you're the man I'm going to talk to about it.
Cool. That's I'd love to hear that. That would be that would be awesome. I mean, and the other thing too about the author is he welcomes all of it. So even when trolls, as you're familiar with the term, go on his YouTube or wherever, or on his Instagram and make insults or say all this is nonsense, he answers it by saying, great, please elaborate, or please tell me more, because I'd like to know really what you think and why you think that. And a lot of times with the trolls, they'll hurl insults, or they'll say it's nonsense, but they won't follow up after that. They don't answer. He's like, well, thank you. That's perfectly fine. Could you please explain why? And they don't answer. which is kind of interesting. And he wants it. He actually, that's a guy that welcomes, feedback, whether it's good or bad,
Yeah, so world's full of trolls, and when logic and reason doesn't work, they just
No.
insult you. So,
Yeah.
but that's okay, my friend. But thank you so much for being on Let's Find Out. I look forward to having you back later this year, and probably by then you have a couple more cases. And if you don't mind, let's walk through some of them.
I'd absolutely love to. And really happy that you had me on. I thank you so much for that. I do appreciate it and appreciate your time.
Thank you, my friend.
Copyright Diego the Podcaster. All content for Let's Find Out is the property of Diego the Podcaster and is served directly from our servers with no modification, redirects, or rehosting. All celebrity impersonators are paid performers. The impersonated celebrities do not endorse or promote any views or opinions expressed by our guests, Diego the Podcaster, or Let's Find Out. The information shared on Let's Find Out with Diego is provided on an as-is basis, with no guarantees of completeness, accuracy, usefulness, or timeliness.